Yes, the recording has started successfully. So, yes, okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Bhaswati, representing the Sudan Task Force of Genocide Watch. Today, we are privileged to have with us Professor Kahn, a SUNY Distinguished Service Professor of Theatre at Buffalo State University, where he has taught acting, devised theatre, and directed stage productions for over 30 years. Professor Kahn taught K-12 populations for 10 years prior to his work in higher education. He is the founding director of the Anne Frank Project, a multi-layered program at Buffalo State University that utilizes the wisdom of Anne Frank as a springboard for the examination of conflict, education, and social justice through the lens of story and performance. He speaks, presents, and teaches internationally on the intersection of story, conflict management, identity exploration, and community building. Most recently, at the United Nations, Rwanda Embassy, US Capitol, and in Rwanda, Kenya, Switzerland, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Professor Kahn has extensive acting experience in professional theatre, feature film, as well as multiple television and commercial credits. He is the recipient of several prestigious awards, including President's Award for Excellence in Teaching SUNY, Kennedy Center Award, Toby Tickton Back Award for Holocaust Education, and so on. Professor Khan's book, Story Building, a practical guide for bringing the power of stories into classrooms and communities, is used by teachers and community leaders all over the world. Professor Khan's most prized roles are husband to his wife Mariam and father to his children Sam and Nate. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Khan. It's truly an honor to have you here. To begin, could you share with us what first inspired your work with the Anne Frank project and how it has shaped your perspective on the importance of survival narratives?
Mm, it's a good question. Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I really appreciate the work that you do with your colleagues at Genocide Watch, really important for us. And thank you for reading that whole bio. My mother will be very proud that you said all of those wonderful things. Um, it's a great question. And I wish that when I started being a professor 32 years ago here at Buffalo State, I wish I could say to you that all of this was on my radar. It was not. I'm a theater professor. I'm an actor. I'm a director. I'm a teacher. And I always believed that stories were far more important than just entertainment. And one of the reasons that I stopped being a professional actor only and went into academia is because academia is one of those places where we can extend the reason we're doing things and obviously lean on the educational purpose. I'm a Jewish American, and there's a great variety of on the ladder of Judaism about how religious somebody might be, or how they practice, how spiritual, how much it's about a people, a culture, how much it's a religion. But I can tell you a common denominator is a Hebrew phrase called tikkun olam, which means to repair the world. That's our mission. Our job is to improve the world. One of the reasons is because for 5,000 years, right, we have been persecuted as a people, and that obviously has not even slowed down as we come to a peak in anti-Semitism around the world. So it's always been important to me. My mom said that I was born with a social justice bug in my ear, like how are we supposed to make this world better? And that idea of justice has always pervaded my thoughts when I was directing plays, when I'm acting in plays, but particularly when I'm directing, because then you have that sense of the conceptual control of the event as well. So I'm always thinking, how could this have benefited our students? How could this work in this process, not necessarily the product, but the process? So in 2006, I was directing a play, a production of The Diary of Anne Frank. And I know you know the story of Anne Frank. And most of our students here at Buffalo State University are non-white, black, brown. And we had a problem. And it's a problem that many American theater departments have in higher education, which is that we predominantly, and I don't think it's malicious, I think it's by default, that traditionally we will present plays that are written by white men about white experiences. And then asking our black and brown kids, through the filter, see yourself in there. And so I always say at our department meetings, when we're talking about this season, I said, I know why the black and brown kids are not coming to the theater. We're not telling their stories. So with our Diary of Anne Frank, we thought it would be best to have two Anne Franks. Of course, the Jewish Anne Frank hiding with her family for 2.5 years in Amsterdam. Obviously, that was not successful. She was found and sent to the concentration camp with her family and the other family that was living with them. And everybody, as you know, the story ended horribly. Everybody died except her father. Father came back, saw that diary, and came back to the annex where they were hiding, and looked at that. How could my little girl know so much, right? Well, that's a universal story. The Diary of Anne Frank has been translated into more languages than any book in the entire world except the Bible. So the Bible, the Diary of Anne Frank, that's good company, right? And these are powerful stories. Is it because there are that many Jews in the world? No. We're less than 2% of the world's population. What Anne Frank tapped into was this universality, this courage and this hope and this ability through story and through her documenting her story in the diary to see light in the midst of darkness. That's a story we all need. We could use it right now, right? I don't think I've lived a year on this planet when I didn't say, this would be a great year for the Diary of Anne Frank. Every year is a great year. So in order to meet our audience, our very diverse, colorful audience on campus halfway, I had two Anne Franks. Of course, the Jewish Anne Frank. But we also had a Rwandan Anne Frank. She was imagining herself a Tutsi hiding from Hutu extremists during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, right? I didn't change a word. I was just offering that, yes, we know about the capital A, the capital F, Anne Frank. Prolific writer, incredible soaring soul, impacted millions and millions of people. But what about all the little A, little F's Anne Franks? How many diaries have we missed, right? How many? I'm sure there are children in Rwanda, I know that, and in the Sudan, and in Ukraine, and in Gaza, and in Palestine, and Jerusalem. The list goes on and on. Children are always the most heinous victims of adult atrocities. And they all have stories, right? How dare we cut their stories short? But to document these stories, another situation. It wasn't hard for me to find a black and brown genocide, right? For comparative reasons. So either that was going to be a horrible idea or it was going to be a revelation. Thank goodness it was the latter. And that production, I remember the president of the university coming. We still set attendance records. People were lining up to come and see this show. Yes, I had the idea as the director, but we had incredible faculty colleagues doing the costume, the sets, the lighting, and then most importantly, our students were just amazing. We had the right group of students at the right time, and they embraced this whole idea. Totally. So I remember our president coming up to me, hugging me and saying, Drew, this play is Buffalo State University. We should do it every year. And I said, well, that's a great compliment, but it's a horrible idea. We can't do the same play every year, right? People would get very bored with us. So we tried to maintain that vibe. I was never ever saying someday that this play will grow up to be the Anne Frank Project. It's really, the Anne Frank Project is really the greatest professional mistake of my life. I never planned on it, but it kept on evolving. And that's something about stories in our brains. Stories beget other stories. I bet since I've been talking, you've been thinking about 3, 4, 5 other, exactly. That reminds me of this. Well, that's your brain on story, right? We are here. Evolutionary scientists will tell you, and neuroscientists will tell you, one of the main reasons that we as a species remain here is our ability to tell stories. And that's what distinguishes us, right, from our primate relatives, that we have the ability to bring order to chaos and structure to our lives through the power of story. So I always knew this, and I was always disappointed that when we would do a play and then the audiences would clap and then we'd have a little party with the cast and then that would be it. I would say, well, that was an immense amount of time for that output. We did so much more, so much more. So when the president said that, I said, maybe we should just continue. Maybe we should do like a conference to continue the vibe. We can't do the play every year. So we did what we thought in 2009 was going to be our only social justice festival. And what we fantasized was, let's create a conference, a festival that Anne Frank would like. Not a sit and talk and blah, 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 blah thing. You know, that girl had to sit down for 2.5 years and not move. Anne Frank was not a first row prim and proper student. We probably would have put her in the trouble kids room. She was a handful. So we said every session in this conference must be 1/3 theory, 2/3 practice. Our students must be doing, they must be sweating with this idea rather than someday I'll try that, right? And you've been to conferences before, right? Everybody gets very excited. We put our stuff in a bag, we come back to our office, we put the bag in the corner and we get back to work, right? So this one, we wanted to have lasting effect. So little did I know at that time, that was the birth of what is now the Anne Frank Project and the focus of my professional career, and has certainly altered my personal life as well. So I always knew, to answer your question more directly, I always knew that stories were powerful and they were much more than just entertainment. The Anne Frank Project, neuroscience, and working with my colleagues has proven that. Now, I could talk on and on about why stories are important to us, but you have to remember historically, this idea of Hollywood, Bollywood, New York City, Broadway, this whole entertainment factor is brand new historically. Stories were there to provide order to chaos, to provide lessons, to provide prescriptions for living. 15,000 Athenians in ancient Greece didn't come to the theater say, I'm going to give it 4 stars and eat popcorn. They went to the theater because that is where they learned law, order, and how they were supposed to live. Lessons. So really, the Anne Frank Project taps into that holistic historical definition of stories and the power of stories.
Well, that was a powerful answer, I must say. So, yes, Professor Kahn, you have worked extensively with the survivors. So, would you please share with us the challenges and ethical considerations in collecting and sharing oral and written testimonies from the survivors?
So, yes, and thank you for asking that. Stories are extremely important in the healing process and the post-genocide process and the during the genocide process, right? Sometimes we say stories and people feel like because we are all familiar with stories that we can jump right in. I think that something that's crucial to share with you is as important to set up the structure and the environment and the trust for where those stories are taking place than sitting people down and saying, give me your story. It's not how we work. And also, you're talking to a community of survivors and victims who have understandably and justifiably lost a lot of trust, especially with strangers. So we can't come in and say, tell us your story. And also, we can't assume that everybody knows what we're talking about when we say stories. Very often in my work, I will go to a university and I will ask them to tell me their mission. And their mission often has story in it. And I said, well, I'm a story professor, so tell me, how do you tell your story? And they usually say something like, well, we tell our story. I said, no, don't give me the name in the definition. Tell me how you tell your story. The reason I'm telling you this is I think we all believe we know how to tell stories. We don't. We know how to watch stories. We know how to consume stories. We know how to be entertained by stories and be moved by stories. But telling stories is a very difficult process to do it accurately and effectively. So I think the sharing of story for the survivors that I've been in front of, and these are predominantly Holocaust survivors and survivors of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Stories are really important and valuable when the environment for telling those stories and the ingredients for how to tell those stories are taken. We take as much time with the survivors as we would for the hearing and sharing of stories. I actually think it can be counterproductive if we don't prepare those testimonies well, then we are really actually going backwards. We are re-traumatizing the victims, and we are really not respecting their narratives. We need to give them shape and structure, and most importantly, provide an environment that is trusting, secure, safe, and loving. And until those conditions happen, I think it can be, even though we mean well, I think it could be disadvantageous to the community. But once those conditions are met, I have experienced profound healing, profound growth, profound discovery. I'll give you an example. One of our really special board members at the Anne Frank Project is a woman named Anne. Her name is Sophia Veffer. Sophia Veffer, get ready, went to school with Anne Frank. So she had a different experience. She's still alive, right? She's quite a character. I think she would have been with the Holocaust or not, but she came and spoke to my cast in 2006 because I wanted her to give some impact. And she said something very telling to me. She said, "I will come, but you will never get rid of me." And I said, well, that's okay. And she was right. She came to every rehearsal, every performance, and she's a really important member of our board. In fact, our latest program is called Sophia's Legacy: Holocaust, Genocide, and Conflict Education in the Classroom. We're training teachers to bring the truth into the classroom, the how of that. I can get back to that later. What I have seen with Sophia is a complete and utter change. I've sat next to her hundreds and hundreds of times in front of high schools, in front of businesses, in front of universities. She's even received an honorary doctorate from our university because of the profound impact she has. But she doesn't always feel great physically, right? She's not 30 years old anymore. I'm sworn to never tell you her age, but you can do the math. She was born the same. She's only like 10 days younger than Anne Frank would have been. So, and also you have to remember, even if she is in her 90s, if you add the fact that during her formidable years of 13, 14, 15, she was starved in a concentration camp, she's like 130 years old, right? So she often will come when I pick her up and take her to a school. She'll say, "I feel horrible. I feel sick. I don't think anybody's going to listen to me. I don't think anybody cares." And then 100% of the time when I drive her home, she says, "Oh my God, where are we going next? Doctor, give me your bill. You have filled me. You have cured me again." I didn't cure her, story did. Her sharing of story evolved her soul, evolved her heart, I think has kept her alive to where she is right now. I see in front of me the profound impact when all of those measures are attended to, about safety, about love, about care, and these kids just come and swarm her. They just can't, I think they think she's pretend. Remember, to your age too, the Vietnam War was ancient history. World War II is like, what? There's still people here? Yeah. So I have seen firsthand her impact. And there are other survivors in this community who do not share their story, who I do not see the same life force as I see from Sophia. Let's switch continents. in Rwanda, you know, a significant part of their rewriting their national narrative, their national story, is based on forgiveness. This commitment to forgiveness, this commitment to community, this commitment, here goes that L word again, love. I'm going to say love a lot because I think we need it. And I think it's a very healing emotion. I know it is. I don't ever use the word tolerance. I think we should be striving for more than that. Is that all we're capable of, is tolerating each other? I don't buy that. I think that we're capable of loving each other. Stories enable us. They're great platforms for loving each other. So the Rwandans, and this is not brand new. This is part of their homegrown solution. Pre-colonization, they were fine. There was, of course, problems here and there, but they have these remedies, these homegrown solutions. One of those remedies is forgiveness. That it's in their blood. It's not like they had to learn forgiveness all over again. It's been how they roll. It was intensified with colonization because the Catholic Church had no idea what great Christians they were creating. Rwandans are true 7 days of the week Christians, like they live the Bible, right? I love going there because it's honestly, I tell my mom, it's where I feel the most Jewish, when I'm surrounded by Christians practicing Christianity, living it, right? Like a prescription for life, not on Sunday, I'm going to hug everybody, and then the rest of the days do horrible things, right? You can't cherry pick the Bible. So the Rwandans said, we agree with this theory, but we need a place to practice it. Now think about that. Remember my conference, 1/3 theory, 2/3 practice, right? And Rwanda's government responded. They created reconciliation villages. Perpetrator lives next door to victim. And yeah, not only do they live next door, but in the morning and in the evening, they have prescribed mandatory testimony, story. Everybody must come, and the perpetrators must say something that they experienced during 94. The more they talk about it, the closer they get to God. That's in their mindset. I'm quoting them. And the victim gets closer to forgiveness. And the forgiveness is, it's a messy personal issue. It's not like that. So what we have found is that the government said, okay, for 3 months, perpetrators live next door to victims, and we're going to let you gradually figure out your reconciliation progress and process one at a time. Some it may take several months. Some it may take a couple of weeks. Some say, I'm not ready yet. But now we see stories of these perpetrators and victims saying, when I first saw him, this is like a victim speaking, he was like the devil. I thought of him as pure darkness. Now, as a genocide expert, you already know that is the first step, dehumanization, right, towards genocide. So it's flip-flopped, right? Though he's not the devil. He's a dad, he's a brother, he's an uncle, right? We're not there to pass judgment. He has already been found guilty and admitted his wrongdoing. But now we hear these stories that the Rwanda government said, okay, that reconciliation village is now ready for a new group. And the people, 100% of the inhabitants are saying, we're not leaving. This is where we live now. We live in these forgiveness simulators. Why? They attribute their constant telling of story, their constant use of exchange, of humanizing each other, and saying, here is my personal experience, here's what I felt, here's what I was told, here's why I did what I did. If we write it down, you mentioned writing. My work is really not in the writing of stories, it's in the performance of story. The sharing of story. I don't even like the word performance because it makes it like we have to act well. It's about the sharing of story based on preparation and devising together and building these stories together. So they are literally in these reconciliation villages in Rwanda, learning how to build and reconnect broken stories. It's extremely powerful. So I bring my students to these reconciliation villages. And you can imagine, Their little Western brains are like, is this pretend? What is going on? So those are two examples of many where I see the power of story being therapeutic, being medicine. And I told Sophia many times on our drive home, you are a social animal and stories are medicine. That's why you feel great. She's like, where are we going next? Where are we going next? So just to a very local and a very international idea about the power and the healing power of stories. You know, you've heard of PTSD before, yes? Okay, that's true, right? When people are traumatized. So 1994 in July, at the end of 100 days in Rwanda, there's 13 million people in Rwanda. You take away a million that were murdered, so 12 million people in Rwanda had PTSD. Enabled with the same tools and the right resources, of which story is part of them. PTSD, we're finding, can turn into PTSG, post-traumatic stress growth. That somebody's spirit can not only be healed, but grow. These are the stories you hear about people who lose limbs and now they're running faster than anybody else. These are the stories you're hearing about people who have told their stories, like Immaculée Ilibagiza, who is really Rwanda's Anne Frank, right? She wrote an incredible book called Left to Tell. She has connected her power of forgiveness, her superpower, to her story in such a way that she fills auditoriums around the world. People can't wait to get in front of her. She has surrendered to the power of story. And once again, I don't want to say it's easy, because in order for PTSD to turn into PTSG, you must be supported by all the right resources. My question is, how do we get all those resources to the people who need them most? So this event, this horrific, mind-boggling atrocity of an event, can eventually act as a trampoline to helping others. Tall order, not easy, but I've seen it. You're very patient. You're a good listener.
No, that was an excellent answer. Actually, I learned a lot. And since we are talking about forgiveness, I'm remembering another person. I don't know whether you're familiar with this name, Consoli Nishimbe. She is also a survivor of the genocide against the Tutsis of 1994. She also, in her memoir, she also talks about forgiveness time and again. And when I was reading her, I was so perplexed. How a person can talk about forgiveness when she when the person is losing almost all her family members, and when she herself was mercilessly raped by one of her neighbors, and still when she's writing her memoir, she is talking about forgiveness. And she did not survive the genocide, but because of that horrible rape, she is now an HIV positive patient, but still she is talking about forgiveness. So now I think that makes sense when you're talking about PTSD. Wow. So, yes, growth. That's really great. That was enlightening.
And
So,
Bhaswati, you're latching
yes,
on to something. I would say, of all the things, that when I bring my students back from Rwanda, I think you and I have talked about this before. They're in a class with me.
yes.
They're processing that through building a play that tours local high schools,
Mm.
secondary schools,
Mhm.
we call them. I would say 95% of the themes of those plays have to do with forgiveness, because my students will say, I never thought it was possible. And if you grow up in
Exactly.
the United States, it's easy to believe that that's some sort of grandma word, right? Like, oh,
Correct.
my pastor or my rabbi or my mom or my grandma talks about forgiveness, but it's not real, right? Like Jesus forgave, but who really does
Yeah.
that, right? To see it in
Right.
action. I watch my students go from 19, 20 years old to those reconciliation villages, and we drive home, they're like 35 years old. They've changed. They've changed because when you witness forgiveness through story, you witness the potential of humanity, right? We often, if our bodies were cars, we are
Mhm.
Ferraris that we often drive like bicycles. We have great potential, and one of those things that we have the potential to do is to forgive and move forward. Yeah, believe me, I don't I have learned a lot about forgiveness, and I have wrestled with that idea. You know, I'm human. I live in this world too. I've done a lot of forgiving since I've um, been going to Rwanda. There's no
That is a
question.
kind of personal lesson for me, actually. I also
Forgiveness,
have to learn.
you have to forgive yourself, right? Forgiveness, here's
Yes.
something I've learned. Here's something I've learned that I'll share with you and the listeners. Forgiveness has actually and ironically very little to do with the person you're forgiving. It has to do with your choice to no longer carry the anger and the rage around with you. You are saying, I forgive you because I choose to no longer walk around with this hate, this disgust, this anger. Let's go back. What if a child what if one of Sophia Vepper's children was mad at Germans forever because of what happened
Mm-hmm.
to their mother, and then he would never let that go when he's maybe never met
Mm-hmm.
a Jew. So this
Right.
forgiveness, I have forgiven people. Here's a little inside scoop. I have forgiven people who don't even know I've forgiven them
Okay.
because they didn't feel my anger either. They were kind of walking around like whatever. And that's, it's really not about them. It's really about, and this is, I'm not a forgiveness expert. I'm just sharing with you things that have worked for me and my students and what I've learned in Rwanda.
Mm-hmm.
It's really
Mm-hmm.
about living lighter, living without carrying around that anger on your back, which impacts everything. So the first bit of forgiveness, Bhaswati, and you don't have to do it right now, is you have to forgive yourself. You have to forgive yourself.
That is a great lesson, actually. Yes.
Mm.
Um, okay, so slightly changing our topic. In the current ongoing conflict in Sudan, since I'm representing Sudan Task Force today, what we have noticed is that survivors of genocidal rape or wartime rape, they are largely staying away from giving testimonies. So, do you think that it is difficult for rape survivors, especially, to come out and share their stories with the world? And I know that you have experience of working with such survivors elsewhere, for example, in Rwanda or the DRC. I remember you were talking about these things earlier when we met. So, would you please shed some light on that?
Mm. I'm only pausing because I question my worthiness to speak on a rape victim's behalf, right? It's not, I don't know the answer to that. I can only share with you my experience and what I've seen and what I suspect. So I think you're talking about, yeah, several years ago, I was fortunate enough to be in the DR Congo, into Bakovu, into a very famous hospital called the Panzi Hospital. Dr. Mkimbwe is a very famous Nigerian surgeon, right? This hospital only serves women who were victims of violent rapes in the DR Congo. By the way, this very week, another 1,200 women will be violently sexually abused in the Congo. It's not random. It's intentional. It's genocide and stopping the creation of children, right? That's what it's really trying to do, is stop the race of the people. So this hospital not only takes care of the women's ability to procreate again, to operate on the women's body in a very delicate, specific operation. But it also takes great pains, the Panzi Hospital, to tend to the spirit of these women. Now, when I was at the Panzi Hospital, the victims were as young as 5 years old and as old as 85. When I first walked in to the Panzi Hospital with the doctor, I was of course greeted with beautiful women dancing and singing. And I was just like, aren't the tables turned here? Who's supposed to make who feel better here, right? I was just in awe of these women. There's also a school there, because when you rape a woman and she has a child, right, that child becomes a child of rape. So there's a whole social rejection that the women are thought to have been touched by the devil, right? That they're no longer useful for the village. So they have been discarded not only by their captors, but by their own. So the devastation, it's like couldn't be worse. All I remember from that day I spent there was joy. That these women were in a place of safety. They were in a place of structure. They had a routine. They were in a place of love. And their children were in school. And when I did a little something with those kids, we were doing a little workshop. They were like any other kids I've ever met, right? And then the parents were so excited and loving that the emphasis was on the person and the person's story. And they were going to be treated there physically, spiritually, psychologically, mentally, for as long as it took to reconnect them to their homes and to their village. And they have an incredible track record there. None of them were ever asked when I was there to talk about their situation. We knew what they had done. I think it's unfair and I think this goes back to something I said earlier in my experiences with stories. I think it's unfair to ask a woman who had been violated to the highest degree to take one for the team, right? To talk about what happened to them because it's what's best for the issue, when we forget the individual. Of course they are not trusting of humanity. Who can they trust and why? When they did trust, look what happened. I think to ask, we need you to appear in court to tell us what happened, should only happen to those victims who have been properly prepared to build their stories and to be in places that are guaranteed safe, loving, structured places. I keep on saying structured because it's really important. You don't go into a house, you go into a house and you say, I trust these walls, I trust the roof, right? Because somebody built this house. So I know when it's raining or snowing that I'm not going to get wet. Those structures need to exist psychologically too, for all of anybody who we ask to share stories. And there are ways to do that, right? We all want the victims to heal quickly. We want the pain to be over. But sometimes we can rush to things to have a result, and we really haven't allowed the processing of the trauma. And we know with unprocessed trauma, we are really just sending out their time bombs. Something horrible will happen because that story becomes larger. It's like cancer, right? It's like a cancer of shared trauma. I think we have to be, despite our best intentions, I think we have to be very careful about what you're asking when we're asking rape victims to share their story. I think they can have major impact if they are nurtured and structured and created in safe environments with whoever is with them next to them while they're telling the story, to guarantee that that story will not be abused, that story will not be used against them, and that somebody won't say you're lying. You know, in genocide scholarship, there's multiple genocides for every genocide. And we call the first genocide is the genocide. The second genocide is denial. Right? The third genocide is revision. That didn't really happen. She had a bad boyfriend. Right? That didn't really happen. It wasn't as bad as that. Nobody wants these things to happen. And let me get back to some neuroscience. The brain loves stories. Stories, in fact, are one of the very few things that lights up the entire brain, not just regions, the entire brain. So when the brain is fed stories, dopamine, some really important hormones, dopamine, cortisol, my ability to focus and empathize, oxytocin, my ability to empathize, everything lights up. So we all feel good when stories happen. Here's what the brain doesn't care about: the truth. So if somebody beats your brain to a story about A, B, or C, you're going to stick to it because your brain wanted to hear it, right? I mean, think about, there are still Americans that say the 2020 election was fixed, right? Smart people, educated, who will say, I know it's all been proven false, but I still believe it. That's because somebody got to their brain quick. So I'd be very, 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 very suspicious if I'm a victim of any kind, particularly. I mean, I can't imagine myself being a woman who was raped. I don't even want to assume that I would know how that would feel. But I would imagine that trust, that the audience, I would have to go through multiple stages of preparation in order to trust that the audience that was hearing my story was not going to manipulate it to their advantage. So I think it's I don't know if I've answered your question. I know that it's a very delicate process. And I can tell you this, when I've seen stories not work is when we rush. Oh, you're a victim? Come here. I need you to be on this platform and share your story so we can advance our cause. Everybody's well-meaning. But sometimes waiting, breathing, and making sure that that story has come from an organic place, and most importantly, that the victim can trust the environment in which they're telling the story. Of course, they're suspicious. Of course, if you told me the Sudanese women were ready to tell their stories, I would say, I don't believe you. I don't believe. Have you heard the phrase "once bitten, twice shy"?
Yes.
But you understand what I'm saying, right? So if I have been if I have been in a home that burned down, I'm really concerned about fire every time I see it.
Right. Yes. So, you know what? Being a woman, it actually makes sense when you're saying that it requires a very safe environment when I am a survivor of some sexual violence, horrible sexual violence, and I'm going to narrate what I experienced because you know what happens actually, people's curiosity, as you were saying, everybody is well-meaning, fine, okay, but sometimes people's curiosity to know what exactly happened to me as a survivor, that is actually kind of doubly agonizing because I have been living that again, I'm living that again, that experience. So yes, I can understand how traumatizing it can be, of course. Oh my god, yes.
You're you're
So
exact you're exactly right. What we're inviting is re-traumatized. We're saying we want
right.
to you will be re-traumatized at whose expense, right? And what happens to
Mm,
that person afterwards? When you were talking to, I was imagining a room in some of these places where the 10 or 12 genocides that are happening as we speak right now are
mm,
happening, right? Who is in the room? Probably men who are running that country and running that
Right.
situation. So even more of a reason to say, what are they going to do with my story? I've already seen what they've done with my story.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So there's also a gender, a gender concern in the audience. Who's receiving this story and why? So I think there's a lot of things to consider. I know we want the pain to go away quickly. You know, that's another part of our neuroscience, is that we don't like discomfort, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's cold outside, we put on a jacket, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those of us who have jackets. You don't see well, you put on glasses, right? Those of us who
Mm-hmm.
have these resources. The brain does not let us be discomfort, because the brain, even though you and I are living in 2024, our brain was designed hundreds of thousands of years ago. So our brain really has not evolved as the rest of us. So our brain is always trying to do the most convenient thing to rid discomfort, so I can stay alive, so I can not be eaten by dinosaurs, so I can
Mm-hmm.
procreate, right? Keep the population
Mm-hmm.
going. I can also find
Mm-hmm.
food and shelter. Everything else secondary. So that's why the brain wants to. But we know about that. So some of us have to stand in the middle. People like you have to say, hold on. I know we all want to be in a comfortable place and we think we're doing the right thing, but let's take our time and let's let victim A, whatever her name is, let's let
Mm-hmm.
her decide. Let's let her decide when and if she's ready.
Right.
But her existence and her next step in her healing process can never be dependent on whether she did or did not share her story.
Absolutely. Right. So, yes, here is my final question to you. That is, Professor Kahn, do you think that the stories that we have been collecting from the survivors, their personal stories, um, they are contributing to the healing process, to the reconciliation that we have been talking about? But do you really think that the survivors' personal stories can contribute to education about genocide prevention, or these narratives can actually influence legal and international actions to prevent and punish genocidal crimes?
Mm. So you've asked two what I think are very different questions. The first question, do I think that stories have the power to educate and heal? Absolutely, 100% yes. I see it every day in my work. And I want to get back to it too, because when I say story, I mean something very specific. And most of it is not the sharing. B, your second question, do I think it can move international communities to pass legislation that will, I never rely on governments to make the right choice. No. I hope, that would happen. And some countries it has. Listen, stories have been happening for a long time. If we haven't moved the needle yet at a policy level, right? But I think we've also rushed that idea. Just because there's somebody in a room sharing testimony does not include the whole process. And here's what I want to go back to. When stories are their most powerful as far as educating, because remember, I train teachers to use story-based learning in the classroom, right? Stories as the curricular platform. What do I see? I see students feel like they matter. Like suddenly this education system that was not about them, that was about the convenience of adults, right? Sit down, shut up, don't move, right? That has nothing to do with teaching them. That has to do with the convenience of the teacher, right? The convenience of the system. Remember, this was a system that was intended to do good, because in the late 1800s, suddenly public education in the United States and in Western Europe, in the West and Europe included, uh, was a brand new thing. It wasn't just for wealthy people, right? So what were they going to do with these kids? The reason that we had public education is because we needed factory workers. right? These were great jobs. You could have a house, you could eat. So how did we teach them? We were preparing them for factory work. Line up in lines, separate girls from boys, really educate in batches. You're third grade, that's your batch. You're going to move down the conveyor belt, right? And what are you supposed to do in class? Sit down, shut up, listen, listen to your teacher, do everything they say. And if you don't, you get a little knock, right? And then if you have to go to the bathroom, do it quietly, walk in a straight line, and respond to a bell. The bell in early education, early public education, was there to prepare that student for the bell in the factory that said it's time to break. So doing monotonous things quietly makes a lot of sense when you're preparing people for factories. So here's something that I know is not a surprise for you. The factories have closed, but we're still teaching students the same. We spend the first 2 years of a child's life saying, walk, talk, and then the rest of their lives, sit down, shut up. Story-based learning is about using the students' stories and the students' stories that they make up and devise and create together, move the content from the brain to their hearts. And that's what we need to be teaching the next generation of people. We need to be teaching them compassion, empathy, love, right? Not facts. I don't really care what happened the building of the Erie Canal out here, like what date it took place and how many bricks it took. That's really not going to advance my life. What's going to advance my life is, how do I build communities? How do I resolve and manage my conflicts? And how do I explore my identity? I'm going to say those three things again: community building, conflict management, identity exploration. Those are the three pillars of story-based learning. So when you ask, can those things change? They can when you emphasize the building of story, not the performance of story. The performance will come. They'll be very proud of their story. There's no question about that. Our intent is to be present every step of that story, every molecule, every atom. Because, and this is what we say to each one of our students when we're in front of students or teachers or whomever, we say, you matter and your story matters. We, the Anne Frank Project, are here to help you tell your story, because if you don't, someone else will, and they're going to get it wrong. You nodded because you know someone has told your story incorrectly. And then who suffers? Who suffers? And then we retreat into that place of silence. When we don't involve the students and their stories in the creative process of building stories, we risk the most dangerous word in the human language, and that is silence. Silence has killed far more people than any single tyrant or dictator in our world. Let's go back to that classroom that I talked to you about with the Industrial Revolution. We are training, we're not doing this maliciously, but you don't have to be malicious for something to hurt somebody, right? If somebody accidentally ran into somebody walking through the street in a car, they don't have to be intending to do that to hurt them. They're still hurt, right?
Right.
So I think I don't think there's malice in what I'm about to share with you, but I think it's to be recognized. We have created, through our education system, millions and millions and millions and millions of bystanders. We have rewarded young people for being still and quiet, which is the opposite of activism. In fact, if you're in the front row and you're really quiet, you get a cookie, or you get a A++, or you're my favorite kid, right? So then I'm always surprised when a school shooting or another tragedy happens, and then somebody who has the audacity to say, I can't believe the kids didn't do anything. You can't believe you taught them not to do anything. You actually rewarded them for doing nothing, for stifling their impulse to take care of their brothers and sisters. We have to wake up that impulse. And one of the great platforms is the building and the process of building stories, step by step. What's the theme of the story? What's the structure of the story? What's the style of the story? The process is everything. I think there's a theme in our conversation today. The process to victim testimony, the process of building stories. Healing is not like forgiveness, it's not microwavable. It's not fast. In fact, I never eat fast food because I think it's a contradiction in terms, right? I want my food to be cooked slowly, right? Like you're smiling right now. Like I bet your mother cooks a delicious, but she doesn't do it quickly. She probably doesn't own a microwave, right? Yeah, Africa's the only place, you didn't really ask, but I'm telling you anyways, Africa's the only continent that I eat goat. I love goat in Africa, but I don't trust Americans with goat because they're going to cook it too fast. So this idea of process needs to be reintroduced to the classroom. And here's my experience. Children are patient with process when it's about them. And story-based learning requires the teacher to come down from the mountain, stop teaching at our students, start learning with them. My Rwandan teachers will tell you, whenever I come, the last year's group will come and hug me and say, and this is last year. He said, Professor, I have to thank you for introducing story-based learning because now my students know. And I said, what do they know? Well, they know that I love them. I said, well, didn't they know before? He said, how could they? They were sitting down, yelling at them from the chalkboard and then hitting them with a stick when they weren't listening. That's not love. Now I am the tree in the story, or I am the lion in the story. I'm learning with them. And they all hug me at the end of the day. This is why I wanted to be a teacher. And by the way, training teachers in Africa to use stories in the classroom is like teaching a fish to use water in the ocean. Stories at continent, simpatico, right? They are together. So I do believe that, and I see it every day, that stories and the process of building stories is an incredibly important tool for learning, for healing, for community building, for all of those things that we do. I have faith that one day the governments of our world will embrace this idea? I'm an optimistic man, but my faith is dwindling in some areas of the world. You can understand that we are not at a democratic high right now in the United States, right? Yeah. But when I go to, even on November 6th, when everybody I knew, I live in New York, it's a very blue state, right? Was very disappointed. I got to think in the back of my head, okay, this is disappointing. However, in June, I get to go to Rwanda, where the government has chosen to use stories and the enabling of Rwandan stories, 13, 14 million stories. I think President Kagame is a story enabler. He has said, here's the tools. You reclaim your country. You rewrite your narrative. Well, that's really smart leadership, because if I write something, if you were my student and I did a big lecture and then I said, write something about it, you'll probably write because you're a good student, but you won't be excited about it. But if you're writing your story, you're going to ask for more paper. Right? So I mean, it sounds weird, but it should not be revolutionary that education should be about our students' three favorite people: me, myself, and I. That is developmentally accurate, that a child, an adolescent, a college student should be thinking about themselves. We need to redirect education so it is. And I guess I'm lucky and fortunate, because the one thing I know a lot about, stories, have become are extremely powerful platforms They surprised me. They surprised me. I was not planning on the Anne Frank project, but I'm
Mhm.
thrilled. I'm thrilled that the one thing that I really know a lot about can be extremely useful. So I'm actually working with multiple universities. I'm actually working with the Rwanda embassy. I'm actually working
Mhm.
with the USG at the United Nations for the Office for the.
Mhm.
We're talking
Mhm.
about we're talking about in the infancy right now. How can stories be a useful tool at that level? Now that's exciting. When they ask me what are my initial thoughts, it's a great idea. Patience. Slow, slow cook the idea, one step at a time.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kahn, for the answer. Um, so, how can our audience learn more about your work or contact you? We have already talked about your book, and we have talked extensively about Anne Frank project and Sophia's legacy also. But if you are willing to shed more light on that.
So the best way to get information, and we redesigned our website to be uh, to receive as much curiosity as possible, is literally Anne Frank Project, one word,
Mhm.
annefrankproject.com. You will see
Mhm.
our website, and there's lots of contact information. I always love to hear emails. Hey, I heard you on a
Mhm.
podcast. So we are better. Here's what I know, and it would be it'd be one thing if the Anne Frank Project's success was all about me. That's not true. I proudly drive the bus. Right, it's a very long bus. First of all, I have to say that our students are the center of everything we do. That's why they like it, because they created it. And that's a strategy. That wasn't a guess. That was like, let's ask the students. Very often in education, we are making decisions about you and for you
Mhm.
without you. And then we're shocked that it doesn't work. It's like, why didn't we ask students, right? So students are really, really an important part of this. Number two,
Mhm.
my colleagues here at Buffalo State University and the leadership here have embraced this work.
Mhm.
And really important is that we have really, really generous donors that make like our students' trips to Rwanda scholarship. These things obviously are extremely helpful, and I could not do it without them. So there's a lot of we in that. We are very excited about Sophia's legacy because
Mhm.
there's amongst our partners are the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C., our School of Education here at Buffalo State University, strong school of education, renowned, and maybe most importantly for this conversation, the Rwanda PVE curriculum, Peace Value Education curriculum. I think, and I don't have the research on this, but I think you could probably find it for me. I think that we are one of very few, if not the only American Holocaust education program that has
Mhm.
imported an African curriculum, not the other way around, right? Their
Okay.
their peace value education curriculum goes to every child in the country, learns the truth about 1994 and learns why it
Mhm.
happened and learns how it cannot happen through stories, through
Right.
stories. It is so successful that the children, and I think this is how we stop the genocide thing
Mhm.
worldwide, they have figured it out that the children come home to grandma and grandpa, come home to mom
Mhm.
and dad and say, that's what you've been telling me about 1994 is not true. We don't call people that. It's not, they're
Mhm.
not cockroaches, daddy. Those were people like you.
Mhm.
This,
Mhm.
the far right and the people who deny genocide and are revising genocide stories, they have done a very good job making sure we, the adults, are fighting with
Mhm.
each, right? And we
Mhm.
have fallen prey to that
Mhm.
because they don't want the groups of African Americans, Jewish Americans, Muslim Americans. They don't want us to be together. So suddenly our numbers are
Mm-hmm.
really, so they've done a good job about creating stories so we're at each other, right? Here's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of a second grader, right? An 7-year-old, 8-year-old, armed with the truth and empathy, coming home and making generational change. That's the goal. So the goal of Sophia's legacy is to get to that second grader. And
Mm-hmm.
our means of doing that, you know this as well, probably better than I. There is a ton of information about the what of Holocaust education, about the what. There's a lot of material out there, right?
Right.
What there isn't a lot of information is how. How do teachers in today's educational environment, how do they
Mm-hmm.
teach this? So we're taking all of the how out. We have 5 hours, we have recorded 5 hours of Sophia Vepper's testimony, cut it up into
Mm-hmm.
small videos. Underneath those videos, we will
Yes.
have options. Here's how to unpack this in classroom. We want to give the
Mm-hmm.
teachers everything they need so they don't have to think about anything. They just have to teach the truth. And
Mm-hmm.
we'll take everything else for them. So we're in our second year of a 2-year grant to create this with our pilot teachers. And we have
Mm-hmm.
eight teachers from 2 different schools. They are amazing. They are amazing. And they embrace their favorite part of Sophia's legacy, Sophia's videos. Second part, Rwanda's story. They cannot believe how the gems and the jewels that are in that. And once again, it shatters the mythology about that continent. The mythology from the West is, that country with those people. I mean, that continent with those people. Well, those people, let me tell you this, those people can teach us a lot. And I'm forever thankful and grateful for my connection to the remarkable country of Rwanda.
So, being a teacher myself, I every time, whenever I have to teach genocide to my students, I have to figure it out how to teach.
Yeah,
So,
I know.
yes, Anne Frank Project and Sophia's Legacy, they are doing this job easier. How to teach genocide, how to take Holocaust into classroom and make everything easier for the students. And yes, I think our discussion is going to end on a positive note. That is, stories can indeed prevent genocide from repeating itself. I think you would agree.
Yeah, yes, you have a good audience for that. Yes, you're right. I do agree. I think the last thing to really tell you too about Sophia's legacy, it's in the title. Holocaust, genocide.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not looking at the Holocaust as a singular event, right? It's part of all of
Mm-hmm.
the Holocaust. So Holocaust, genocide, and maybe the most important, and conflict education in the classroom. We must, as teachers, relate this information back to our students' lives so it can be acted upon. Let me give you an
Right.
example. Let me give you a quick example. So the
Mm-hmm.
same recipe for genocide, right? It's planned, systematic, sponsored, good people
Right.
must do nothing, right? That if we take the stakes of genocide out, lower it down, and talk about something that is negative but not as noxious as genocide, like bullying in
Mm-hmm.
school, peer pressure,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Very
So
true.
you have glasses on right now. What if I was in middle school and I said to my friends, let's make fun of the girl with glasses, right? Let's
Glasses. Right.
in the hallway, I'm going to bump her
Mm-hmm.
so her glasses fall off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of you are going to create a circle around it so nobody sees it, right? And then when somebody comes to break it up, everybody walk away and don't say anything. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that is a recipe for genocide.
Right.
So if we don't connect it to our students' lives, we can't hope that it's learned. We must say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, Sophia's story, hey, Rwanda
Mm-hmm.
1994 genocide against the Tutsi story, hey, this has to do with you too, and here's why. And here
Right.
Here's how you can stop it.
Mhm.
How about good people doing something? Sophia will tell you that when we're in a global society,
Mhm.
when your neighbor needs help, bring the chicken soup.
So true.
Go help them.
Right.
Go
Right.
help them.
Thank you so much, Professor Kahn, for joining us today and for this great discussion. So thank you once again. So with a positive note, we are going to end our discussion now. I'm going to stop recording first.
Can I say one more thing? I just want to say on air, thank you for your work. Oh,
Yes.
okay.